Princes and Priests, Chapter 16, 64? No one moved much due to the cold. They just huddled by the fire and tried to thaw out. The meat was cooked, and they were eating when revolves finally entered camp. He sank to the ground and accepted the meat that Tavia brought to him. He looked up at her. After such an encounter as seeing a guardian summons, it was said that a person would have insight into the truth of others. And while he was half afraid to see, he was too curious to not look at her. Tavia looked like herself for a moment, but then she was swept clean and was in a long, elegant, soft green gown with a golden belt worn low on her hips. There was a crown of golden flowers on her head, emanating sparks of light. He saw her offer him a chalice of life, not a meager meal of roasted meat. For one moment she was a queen. She was radiant with visible power. Her aura was not the white of a priestess, as he might have expected, but golden and sapphire flushing with pinks and greens. Then he saw her once again as the battered, wind-burned, snow-chapped, weary Tavia.
"Thank you,"
he said, with great gratitude, taking the gift she offered, as if it was the chalice he had seen for a moment. He looked over as Shannon and Theo returned to camp. He saw Theo without even trying. Theo wore dark velvet robes that trailed on the ground and had a great black and silver fur upon his shoulders. He wore a golden crown and belt that were set with stones of vibrant power. He was no longer the weak, frail man that he appeared to be. He stood tall and was as strong and muscular as a Purton. He stood with authority, looking like an Oirion's king of old, and yet somehow older and darker. He was awesome. Reven was startled at the slender man's shocking change, but then he saw Shannon. Reven did not see him as he expected with the insight as he had seen the others. In a terrible flash, he saw the horrific image. Shannon was in a cardinal's robe, wreathed in lambent flame. His hands were bound with magical energy, held up over his head. His skin and fabric were burning, and his hair was singeing off in the heat. The rings he wore, that of a priest and that of a married man, were both melting, running down his hand and wrist. There was no sound, but Reven saw his scream, the tears on his face, and realized the pain that brought the man to his knees. It was a single horrendous image, one flicker of hell, and then it was gone, but the taste remained. Reven felt ill, he trembled inside. His dwarven mind threatened to go into survival mode. The image was seared onto the inside of his eyelids. He wanted to forget the shocking vision, the touch of hell, but he could not move. He was forced to see Shannon lift his gaze and look at him as he entered the camp. Reven was unable to look away from the man. Every blink flashed the image, almost making it impossible to breathe. Reven knew that there was something he should be putting together. With what he had just seen, what he already knew, things should all fit. But he just couldn't think it through. There was a block.
"How did it go?"
Shannon asked in Dwarven. The feelings washed away, and Reven let them go with relief. He knew that he was not ready to understand it all. The Purton's soft voice seemed to purge the vision from his mind and give him back sanity. He caught his breath, grateful for it to be over.
"It went,"
he said, trying not to let his voice shake. He wasn't sure how to even begin to say what had happened. Such a conversation was certainly not a good idea with Oirion sitting right beside him. He knew that he should be trying to recall what he had just seen, but at the same time, he was desperate to forget it as fast as he could. Shannon bowed his head to him. Theo walked over, took some meat, and then sat by the fire. As Shannon moved to take his usual place, Tavia got up and brought a piece over to him. She stepped in his way, blocking his path. When he moved to step around her, she sidestepped.
"I expect you to actually eat."
"You expect a great deal, woman,"
he said, a bit annoyed.
"Shannon,"
she warned, using a tone that indicated she was going to fight him about it.
"I explained to you last night why I am not going to eat that. Give it to your son."
"So you can wither into nothing?"
she demanded.
"You drop on us, and we are going to have a hell of a time keeping our feet. Eat."
She pushed it at him. Shannon's cheek twitched ever so slightly, but Oirion saw it, and so did Dave. Reven looked at the woman as she proved the vision he had seen of her.
"Tavia,"
Shannon said, forcing himself to calm.
"Ty,"
she snapped back. That froze him for a moment, and they all saw it. Oirion raised an eyebrow at Shannon's reaction. Most Perton men, at least all of the older ones, had Ty at the front of their names, and so calling a Perton man Ty was a good bet it was his name. It was done in honor of the angels who founded the Perton Empire and the great sacrifices the Pertons had made to turn the tide of the Razan War. Shannon undoubtedly would have used the racial name that so many Perton men had sometime in his life, making it odd that he would react to being called by it.
I am not going to eat that.
Shannon pushed it and her hand away.
It will do me more harm than good. If you have not noticed, I do not eat meat. What language do you need me to say that in to make you understand?
Now see, Shannon,
Oirion said.
That leads us back to that conversation we had about the odd things you do.
Shannon looked over at him, clearly annoyed, and becoming more so.
It is not supernatural, Oirion. As I have told you before, I am Perton.
Racial, is it?
Oirion asked.
Dave, are you able to fast for months?
My mother wasn't Perton,
Dave said.
but my father has gone weeks without eating to give the crew larger rations when things have gotten tight. He just trances a lot and tightens his belt. I have to say, when he comes out of one of those fasts he almost thinks starving to death would be better than recovering. It takes a lot of vomiting and debilitating cramps to come out of one of those. Now would not be a good time for Shannon to go through that.
He exaggerated about it, making it sound worse than it was. This conversation was getting into a bad place, and he needed to get them off of Shannon. The man was tired, and when he was tired, people got hurt or killed.
Myself, I do not think we have the supplies or the time for Shannon to come out of the fast he is in. At his age, I am sure he knows how far he can push himself.
Dwarves can do that as well.
Raven said softly.
Only we use bits of dried meat, not tea.
He held up the rather small amount of meat he had taken.
I don't think any of you have seen how a dwarf eats by choice, and I assure you, this is not it. Shannon, sit. Why don't you tell us what your favorite meal is, and we can each say ours. It'll give us something to talk about, and maybe a bit of insight into each other's cultures. Myself, I was just thinking about seal,
He said.
A nice young one, turned on the spit and dripped with butter from the caribou. And on the side, a great bowl of the golden root boiled until it's mashed, mixed with honey and heaped on fine dark rye bread, a pitcher of beer and a mug of coffee. Oh, that would be good.
He sighed.
Horse.
Kava said.
I should have butchered one of the horses.
He sighed.
Marek.
Even said wistfully.
Fire cooked with butter tea and greenweed.
He closed his eyes.
What's Marek?
Dave asked.
It's like a great big cow, sort of.
Raven said.
It is better than beef, but it takes a herd of Azirans to get any. It's quite a hunt, I'm told. Men usually die on it.
It is good training for war.
Ivan grinned.
I like whitefish with a lemon sauce, mushrooms and butter and wine,
Tavia said.
Pasta with a tomato sauce, meat and vegetables in it, red wine and soft garlic toast.
Kelly said with a smile.
Oirion?
Raven asked. Oirion looked up, obviously in pain, trying to find a comfortable position to lie on the ground.
Oh, I suppose I like cold roast on bread with cheese and drippings to dip it in. Nothing fancy.
I like raw pink fish and watercress mixed in a soup.
Selma said.
That would be so good right now.
They all looked at Shannon.
What do you miss?
Raven asked. Shannon sank down to sit as far from the fire as he could and drew up a knee. He looked at the dwarf who had changed the subject and made peace so well. He could play the game. It would help ease tensions and help them all sleep better. The less tension, the less he would be tempted to use them.
Elk.
Shannon said honestly.
Over fire, medium rare, with beer, a salad with elven wine dressing, and a shot of dwarven redberry.
They call that the prince's platter in most of the taverns in Pert.
Oirion said.
I have never had it with a shot of red afterwards, though. It sounds like a hangover or a lost gut. Jamie certainly liked it.
Oirion added, thinking how much Jamie enjoyed that meal.
He ordered it every time it was offered.
It takes much more than that to get me drunk.
Raven chuckled.
But I have ordered that myself a few times and found myself regretting the first shot. It normally leads to more.
One day, Raven, you and I will have to have a shot war.
Even said.
The winner buys dinner.
They all relaxed and sank into their own thoughts. Most crawled back into their makeshift beds to sleep the day away, emerging for a sip of hot tea or to stare at the fire before going back. Theo was with Travis, who was playing for the first time in weeks. Shannon tranced lightly, just off to the side, away from them. Raven crawled out of bed, sitting with the book he had gotten from Shannon, fighting the lock for a bit. "Think dwarven," Shannon had said. He tried to start all over with the idea that it was a dwarven lock. On the off chance that it was, he tried a simple dwarven lock spell. The lock would have you believe that it was holding the book shut, but the true lock was where the owner would put his seal. Raven touched the monogram. The lock opened as simply as that. It had been a riddle lock more than a power lock.
Ha ha!
He cheered at getting it open. He saw Shannon looking at him. Raven grinned and opened the book. He read what was handwritten on the front page. "Hey, Riedel, take a look at this and see what you think. I thought you might enjoy it a bit and get a good chuckle out of it. I certainly did. It's not the best written thing, but the guy has a great sense of humor. He might love to get a letter from you. Yours in God, Roman." The title of the book was A Mage's Journey into Mastery. He turned the page and saw, in beautifully written Pertan, a note that was stuck in the cover. He carefully pulled it out of the inside folder and unfolded it. The note was beautifully written in a graceful, strong hand. He was sure he had seen that print someplace before. "Roman, I got the book. Thank you. I only laughed out loud once during council, but that was rather fitting for the book, I guess. The looks I got were rather of the, that was not what was supposed to happen sort. I just wanted to send you a word. Later, if you're in the city, maybe we can meet at the Green Roof. Ray." Raven looked at the note a bit, then turned it over and read a set of short notes on the back. They were written by the same two hands, replying back and forth to each other. "I'll be at the docks until late. If you can escape, I'll meet you at the King's Bowl." "What are you doing at the docks?" "Remember Javane?" Now what did he do? "He wrote a very pretty song about us. I wanted to have a talk with him. It's one thing to joke, but if your father heard this one, it would be historical. He'd be beyond upset, and I can only imagine what he would say. The bad thing is, it's all about the whole Glenda thing." "That rat. I'll get out of here and help you squeeze him a little." "It's a great song. It just happens to be about us. Damn bards. The crew down here thinks it's grand. They asked me right off how my Vaughn feels." "What'd you say to them?" "Same as ever. You going to be able to get out without a riot tomorrow?" "If I don't, I'm going to hang myself. I'll be there in a mark." "Hey, if you're still there, just to warn you, Tyr Ara is down here with Gren." Raven read it twice, not sure what he was reading. He just couldn't imagine why there would be a two-way conversation on one page. But then maybe he did know.
"You read this letter?"
he asked, trying to think how one piece of paper was having messages back and forth like that so fast.
"No,"
Shannon said, looking up. Raven held it over. Shannon read it, sitting very still. He closed his eyes after a moment and just held the paper. Raven noticed that his hand was shaking the slightest bit, either from the cold or something else. It was not like Shannon to react to anything, let alone something so small. Raven could sense that Shannon knew something about the letter. He cleared his throat.
"How do you send a letter back and forth like that?"
Shannon opened his eyes and looked at the paper in his hand. He spoke softly, but his whisper was broken, and it was a different man's voice.
"Scan that for tags. He might be using it to track us."
He passed the letter back. He was actually using his vocal cords. Raven wasn't sure he had ever heard that outside of a battle and a shouted command. Raven took the letter and held it. He went into a trance. Sure enough, laid on it so tight and neat that he nearly overlooked it, there was a tag. It was so small that the power needed to track it would be impressive. But it was there. Apparently, power was not an issue. Worse, the power on it was demonic, and there was a broken illusion on it as well. Raven tapped it with power, and the tag sparked and zapped him. He swore and tossed the letter into the fire.
Is that how he tracked us so far?
Shannon wiped his face with his hands.
You read this book?
Reven asked, to change the subject.
I have.
Any good?
I would not have given it to you if it wasn't.
Shannon,
Reven said after a moment.
You know what a dwarven summons is?
Shannon looked at him.
I do.
He said.
You know what they say happens after you see one?
I do.
Shannon said carefully.
Why?
He switched to Dwarven, surprising the dwarf.
I shouldn't be able to do that. I'm a priest to a different faith.
Not really. The Purton religion you belong to does not exclude your gods, Master Dwarf. It merely explains them. It does not make them less. It makes heaven more.
So says Saint Tyrrell.
So he does.
Shannon agreed sadly.
Often you say things that herald back to his writings. I studied them once. It made it easier to be priest for Pert and not feel torn over heritage. But now, with time and so much seen, I have lost that feeling of all is one. It is not Pert who comforts me now, but hunts me instead. I am exhausted and torn, and feeling rather betrayed by it all.
You are not alone in that, Reven.
At the moment, that is exactly how I feel,
Reven said, still speaking in Dwarven. He was a bit surprised that he had confessed such deep feelings, and to Shannon of all people.
You do not have to forsake the religion of Pert, to adhere to the faith of your fathers, or the gods that heed to your people. They can walk together in one man, and you can condemn the church as warped as it has become, and still love the Spirit. That which is said, and that which is, are not the same. What was, and what is, are now different than what was meant to be. It would be better for your soul to forsake Pert and fall back to the ancient truths of the gods, who might offer guidance through the tangle of lies and deception of Pert. Perhaps, Reven, that is why you are here now. You might have to endure a trek such as this in order to hear them, so you might be true to the angels and aid others in finding the Spirit again.
Reven looked at him, not saying anything. If nothing else, Shannon was a very complex man with a great grasp of languages.
What of you, Shannon? You guide with the words of a priest, but your name means deepest of all grief in Elder Elven. I'm educated enough to know that. How do you seek to give counsel when you are beyond being consoled?
Take my words or not, Reven. I do not claim to be a saint. I do not claim even to be wise. I merely say what I think. It is up to your heart to hear it or not.
Isn't the dwarven priesthood a form of sorcery?
Theo asked, butting into their conversation.
All priesthoods are a form of sorcery,
Shannon said. Reven almost argued, but let it go. He was not going to argue for the church that he was finding out was not the holy thing he once thought it was. He turned his focus instead to the book that he held. It was an amusing retelling of the life of a man learning to master his magic on the road, in the long outlawed journeyman state. It was only later that he realized he had heard Theo speak in Dwarven several times now. He looked up at the lean man standing at the fire, silently watching the flames flicker and curl. He felt sickened a moment, then pushed it aside. There was no way a young Awans noble would speak the language well enough to understand that conversation. They stayed at the camp all that day. Shannon left them just before dusk and was gone for several hours before he returned, with several small creatures that looked like rabbits of a sort. He handed them to Tavia, who sat at the fire. She paused a moment before she took them from him.
How did you manage to find those?
Kava asked, impressed.
I didn't find so much as a trail.
They were hibernating,
Shannon said softly, watching Tavia lay them out. He had already skinned and gutted them for her and stuffed them with dried herbs and rose-like hips. It was a peace offering as far as the others could guess.
Well, thank you,
Salma said.
I don't care how you found them or killed them. I'm just happy to be able to eat tonight.
Travis caught Shannon's hand and pulled him to sit down near the fire with him, where he had been playing with little snow-made men. Shannon sank to the snow and let the little boy wrap a blanket around him before crawling into his lap. Tavia turned her back to him to cook. There was no meal in the morning. They just packed up and headed down the mountain toward the forest. Once they reached the tree line, the wind was blocked and moods lifted. As they hiked, The snowdrifts tapered off, and the temperature rose. It was soon warm enough that they could pull back their hoods, and scarves and gloves were taken off. They moved through the forest, arriving at a sudden change of growth. The pines ended at the bank of a small, shallow creek. On the other side, the forest was deciduous. It was late, and they were all tired and hungry, so they stopped. Everyone sensed a change that was more than just trees, or the fact that there was no snow on the other side.
I don't like it,
Salma announced as they dropped their packs to the ground and prepared to set up camp.
Me neither,
Dave muttered.
What is that smell?
Ivan asked. A breath of air stirred, carrying an odd reek to them.
Zombie!
Raven hissed.
I hate zombies.
He fingered the handle of his new axe as he looked at the dark, thick forest on the other side of the creek.
What's a zombie exactly?
Ivan asked.
It's a corpse,
Revan said.
one that has been raised from the dead and is like a puppet to the master. A ghoul and a zombie are basically the same thing, but the master, if he is really strong, can stuff a low-level demon in a zombie. That makes it into a ghoul, able to think and act with some measure of intelligence. Zombies aren't as smart and continue to rot, so must be replenished. But they are tougher, harder to stop. See, the thing about them is, they don't feel pain. You can't kill them. Not even if you hack them apart, they don't stop. They keep coming. Hands will drag themselves after you until they reach the end of their master's territory.
How do you kill them?
Dave asked.
You can't.
Oirion said.
They're already dead.
How do we get through?
Dave asked, almost impatiently. He was used to having Shannon answer his questions with the information he was asking for. Shannon looked from the woods to Dave.
Shannon, what do we do when we meet them?
Dave pressed.
Fire works well.
Shannon said with a slight scowl.
You have a good grip on that. Use it.
What about Tavia?
Ivan asked.
She and I have no magic.
Stay close,
Raven said.
I can watch you well enough. I have played with worse before. The trick is to not get cornered, and if it's real important, you just kill their master. They all drop.
No one was about to suggest that they keep going tonight. Raven might have suggested a blessing, and he was sure Oirion expected him to, but he didn't. His heart was not in it, and false blessings were not of much good. Camp that night was restless, knowing what they were going to be facing. They didn't talk much, but just sat around watching the fire or trying to sleep. Oirion had walked apart from the others to look at the forest and to think about Shannon's questions. How a damned, a thing that is supposed to be nothing more than a zombie, can live, can cast spells, can think right and hide in society, if given the chance. He had a fear that there was a reason that Shannon knew so much about it, but he couldn't imagine that a vampire was a real man. That even one of them was soulful and aware was just too much to consider. He shuddered to think of having that sickness, of falling that far. What would that do to a man? What makes you want to drink the blood of another? These thoughts and more went through his head, but there were no answers. There were just more questions. Ravan walked up to Oirion, standing silent for a while.
You study history much in the monastery?
No, not much at all. Why?
I was wondering about the pontiff's past.
Why?
Raven hesitated, unsure what to say. He liked Oirion, but he wasn't really sure that the man was ready to hear this.
The gate of Ulamar was sealed by him, Oirion. He entombed thousands to die slowly inside that mountain, and then in the barrens there were men there, men from the Holy Palace. I recognized them. I am shaken and I need to know what led to that.
He said it as mildly as he could, and yet be honest. Oirion looked over at the dwarf and then sank down, sitting on a fallen tree that faced the forest of aspen and oak. He looked out at the trees, saying nothing for a long time.
It's Shannon, you know,
Oirion said.
What's Shannon?
He says just the right thing to make you question everything.
Yes, but what if he's right? I mean, a year ago I would never have believed that the church had lied about being able to pass through the shield. I never would have thought the pontiff would entomb thousands. I never would have foreseen the higher churchman talking to a blood, getting information and drinking wine with him.
He shook his head.
My God, what has Shannon seen?
They sat there, both questioning their religion and their faith so deeply that it hurt.
Ravan, you've had more training than I. Tell me, what does the term blessed celibacy come right down to?
The allowance of love, if it is in the spirit of worship.
Revan said.
By the old meaning, one can have a wife, but no playing around. Now it means total self-denial. I looked it up. Dwarves measure wealth by how many children they have and how many pounds of jewels. I have neither a child nor a jewel. All I have is this ring and a lot of questions.
He sighed heavily.
So, if you're asking if I think that God would be mad if you were to get along with Tavia, no. I'd be happy for you. I'd even marry you, if you asked. What's the difference, though? Half the upper churchmen have mistresses and bastards anyway. I doubt you having one will upset anything too much.
To you?
No, a penniless dwarf doesn't get a dwarven woman, and a penniless priest doesn't get a human one either. So, here I am. My faith is questioned, not for a woman, but over orcs.
He laughed at that.
Tell you what, Oirion, if you love a woman and feel bad about it later, I'll give you absolution. And if not, and you like it, then you can get married or something and nothing is lost. It'd give a good reason to have a great party.
That is sort of a heartless way to play religion.
Such is life, little brother.
You think we can all get through this alive tomorrow?
Oirion changed the subject.
Not a chance,
Revan said.
The bog was impressive, yes, but we lost one, and I was close to it. Might as well have been two. This, zombies? A dozen ghouls in the bog is one thing, but 1,000 zombies who feel no pain and have no minds. This is bad.
He shook his head.
You, me, Shannon, and Dave, I think, will make it. The rest?
He made the gesture of blessing and left it at that.
Enjoy her while you can. Tonight might be the last night you get to.
The dwarf stood from the fallen tree that they were sharing. He trudged back to camp, his spirits low. He went to the fire and sat down beside Dave.
Where's Oirion?
Tavia asked.
That way, he's off thinking.
Revan nodded.
He might welcome your company, though.
She got up and went out to find him. Revan watched her go, sighed, and began to pick sap off his hand.
What's on your mind, Revan?
Dave asked softly as he sharpened one of Tavia's cooking daggers.
Just wish I had access to a history book right now,
he said.
What about? Maybe I can answer it.
Dave said.
My father insisted that I must know history.
Know much about the pontiff?
Yeah.
Dave hesitated.
Why the doubt?
You're a priest, Revan. What I know, some people call heresy.
Ah, well, I'm questioning the priest thing about now. What do you know? I have no idea about the man, really.
Well, he was a peasant, the son of a prostitute, I think. He was sent into the monastery. He proved to be gifted at political skills and was promoted eventually into the Purton courts. When he was young, the church put him with Tyrell von Armand. They were hunting partners, and they did incredibly well together for the 30 or 40 years they were in the forests. Tyrell was promoted in the hierarchy of the church, but Jerome wasn't. I'm not sure why they weren't promoted as one, since that was how it worked in those days. Then about 2 years later, Tyrell turned up missing, his family dead. The emperor vanished on or about the same time, and Jerome, saying he was witness to it all, claimed that magic destroyed their minds. Jerome immediately took the emperor's throne, claiming to be the regent of Pert. He said he would give it up to whomever proved to be rightful heir. When the pontiff, the old one, died a day later, Jerome claimed divine right to the church throne as Tyrell's partner, since Tyrell, who was the known heir, was still missing. Jerome had taken both thrones. The Purton court was in shock. The empire fell and the church took over. In all, I suppose it took a dozen years, but to a Purton it seemed overnight.
He sighed heavily, his thoughts his own for a moment.
Then Jerome created the legends surrounding Tyrell, making him seem like two different men. One was that of the man von Armand, who had gone crazy, taken by the madness of power, murdering his wife and children. The other was a saint, the holy man who was taken by vampires, but no one knows for certain the truth of what happened except Jerome. And here we are now.
Dave paused and then went on.
You know that Tyrell was the imperial heir, as well as heir to the pontificate, don't you?
Revan nodded as Shannon returned from wherever he had gone.
What's a Purton's input on it?
Revan asked him.
On what?
Shannon said.
On the pontiff and the prince.
I think about it as little as I possibly can. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a long day.
Revan looked back the way Tavi had gone, wondered what was going on out there, and hoped Oirion had taken off his ring for the night. He was annoyed by Shannon's answer, but the man was probably right. Chances were that he knew a lot about it, and they would be up all night talking, not getting the rest that they needed. If they lived through the next few days, he'd ask again and be a little pressing about it. For tonight, he would let his troubled thoughts rest and try to get his body to do so as well. Several hours after dark, the first sounds began to come out of the forest. Chilling air and groaning howls drifted from the darkness beyond the trees, making it hard to relax. They got up one by one to sit around the fire. A thick, sticky fog crept into the camp. It drew up around them, surrounding them, as if it were alive. It was a cold, wet, creeping dampness that felt foul to the touch. It seemed to move toward the fire to investigate it, then recoil back from the heat. Dave tried to think of the other places that he had seen on this trip, so that he could recall it all for record later, and to distract himself from the vile forest. He couldn't focus past the reek, the moans, and the howling. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore.
Is it really necessary that we go through there?
He asked Shannon.
Yes.
Well, can't you do something so that we can at least get some sleep?
From where he sat watching the forest, Shannon looked over at the group of silent and huddled companions.
It is really not as bad as you think.
I've seen zombies.
Salma said in disagreement.
I'm pretty sure it is as bad as I think.
So have I,
Shannon said.
We will be fine.
Let's deal with that tomorrow,
Dave said.
I just want to sleep tonight. I know you can do that.
Shannon gestured vaguely at them. The young man's eyes rolled back in his head, and he sort of folded over against Kelly. She looked at Dave, a little uncomfortable with him against her. She wanted to object, but Shannon's attention was already gone. He looked back the way they had come, and didn't seem to notice. It wasn't too long before all of them got up and found places to sleep. Kelly was left at the fire with Dave sleeping against her. Salma remained there also, watching the forest. The cat woman looked over at the big warrior woman and smiled.
He looks comfortable enough. You?
Not particularly,
Kelly said.
Let's move him into a tent. You can go to sleep then.
Kelly nodded and gathered Dave up in her arms. She carried him to the last tent where Ivan and Travis were already asleep and tried to work him into a comfortable spot.
Kelly,
Salma whispered.
What?
I'm freezing. Did you know that it's winter? We can all share a bed. Just let Dave sleep with us. Oirion will need sleep more than he needs Dave's company.
If you're cold,
Kelly said. She lay down near Dave, expecting Salma to crawl in between, but the little cat woman snuggled up to her, pushing her against Dave. Salma took Kelly's arm, drew it around her, purred, and snuggled in. They both drifted out rather quickly after that. It was hours later that Tavia joined them. She wasn't about to curl up with Ivan, who was curled around Travis, so she snuggled in next to Salma, who pulled her in closer.
You're back late,
Salma giggled as the three women got comfortable.
Shh.
Tavia breathed.
Why's Dave sleeping with us?
He fell asleep in Kelly's arms.
Salma snickered.
he was knocked out and left for me to deal with.
Kelly whispered back.
Where were you?
With Oirion.
She whispered.
Shh. Would you?
It's about goddamn time.
Kelly muttered.
We didn't do anything.
Tavi objected. Salma hugged her.
That's too bad. Didn't you try?
No, now shush.
Morning came all too early, but none of the women moved. It was Dave who sat up on his elbow. He was surprised to find himself wedged in between Kelly and Salma, and even more so to find Tavia curled up against Salma. The last he remembered, he was sitting by the fire with Shannon and Kelly. Salma sat up and draped herself over Dave's side, looking at them.
Well, now you can say you woke up with 3 women in your bed.
She kissed his cheek.
How's that view strike you?
She whispered in his ear.
Kelly might look tough, but she's a woman where it counts, you know.
He half looked back at Salma.
Why don't you reach around and find out how that view strikes me?
She boldly did so. He grabbed her hand with a laugh.
You're a wicked woman, Salma,
he said.
Salma,
Kelly warned.
I'm trying to sleep here. Stop making my pillow hard.
Tavia and Salma snickered. It was an unexpected joke from a very quiet woman. Tavia crawled out to start breakfast. Salma kissed Dave's cheek again and left to help Tavia. Dave lay back down, pulling the warm blankets close. If he wasn't needed, he was not going to get up and get cold. The only problem in his mind was that Kelly stayed as well. He shifted around trying to get comfortable. It was not working well.
Oh, just get comfortable, David. You're losing all the heat.
He took her permission and spooned up against her back, his arm around her waist. He was a little over-aware of the effect that had on him, and the fact that she had to feel it, but he was comfortable at least.
Better?
She asked.
No complaints?
He asked.
No, just be still and let me go back to sleep.
He pulled the blanket over his head, hit his face against her back where it was warm, and went back to sleep himself. Soon they were all up and seemed quite refreshed, despite the long night, the cold, and the difficulty falling asleep. The sky was clouding over, and the peaks behind them were lost from view. Shannon divided the packs more evenly before they shouldered it all and then turned toward the forest.
"Stay close to me,"
he said, as they went under the trees.
"And Salma, if you feel anything, tell me."
I feel a little scared.
She offered, then smiled warily.
I'll keep alert,
she promised seriously. They moved out, each crossing the stream carefully in order to not get their boots wet first thing. Leaving the early morning light behind them, they entered the darkness of the trees.
Into the dark underworld of the forest of the damned,
Even said grandly.
The mighty company fears no evil.
He laughed, but fell silent after that. Early on, they hit a section of the great wide road that ran across the land, much to their relief. It stretched on before them, but it was covered in fallen trees and centuries of debris. It was going to be slow going. The sluggish pace was nerve-wracking. Just knowing how little ground they were covering was enough to make all of their nerves edgy. The men fingered their sword hilts and kept alert.
"Feels like a damn nightmare,"
Theo muttered softly.
"You're in a rush, but you can't move any faster than a walk."
North.
Salma said.
There's something to the north of us.
Shannon nodded.
"Keep moving,"
he said. They hadn't gone much farther in before Salma was feeling things in all directions. Once in a while, a breath of air would carry a smell to them so foul that they all gagged. It felt like an eternity in this twilight night. They were tense with nerves and wanted to be out of this stinking place. Then Shannon drew his sword. The others followed suit. The hiss of the swords escaping their sheaths was a signal that the peace was about to end. They hadn't made it another 10 feet farther before they were attacked by the zombies. There were at least 5 of them coming out of the trees. Shannon jumped and spun, kicking one in the head. The head exploded, and the zombie dropped to the ground. Shannon swung his sword, cutting off the head of another. Dave chopped at one that came at him. His sword went right through the top of its head, splitting the skull. Brain, rotted to slime, spilled out. He gagged and jumped back. Salma leaped upward into the boughs of the trees, escaping the fight. Several of the zombies stood under her, trying to reach up and grab her. The armed members of the company had the zombies on the ground quickly, but the things weren't dead. The one with the missing head was already getting up, moving like some jerky puppet. The others, with their clothes and flesh rotting off, were moving as well. Shannon didn't wait and moved on at once. He motioned Even to the lead and then took up the last place himself.
"Keep your head,"
Shannon said.
"We have minds they do not."
Ivan led them on. Shannon had Dave turn the path behind them to flames as Ivan broke trail for them through the fallen trees. It seemed as if the debris and dead wood had been piled up on the road on purpose in order to slow travelers. It worked well. Ivan tripped and fell often. The smaller members were left crawling over the tangle. They stopped often, on a word from Shannon or Raven, to move off the road. They had to duck down and hide as they waited for the groups of zombies that shambled past, through the trees, or even over the tangle in the road. The company kept a slow walk at best and seemed to be going nowhere. Dave felt his heart begin to pound when he realized that it was getting darker. He really didn't want to spend the night here. In the first small clearing they entered, Shannon caught up to Even.
"We will camp here."
Here.
Salma asked.
They'll surround us.
Panic was in her voice.
"Here,"
Shannon said.
"The faster we can get tents up and a fire lit, the better."
They all set to work. Shannon didn't help, but grabbed Theo. They went around the camp, kneeling every 4 feet or so, drawing in the mud and leaf debris. By the time they finished, the camp was set up.
Here they come,
Salma hissed.
"Relax, little kitten.
Shannon said softly. She gripped her bow and took out an arrow, preparing to shoot as a zombie shuffled out of the wood toward them. As he neared, he triggered the spell that Shannon and Theo had laid. A flash of power hurled him back with a spark of light. He got up, half crushed, and tried again. The same thing happened.
Damn.
Theo breathed.
That's nice and useful. Why didn't you teach me that months ago?
It works only for zombies. It would have been of no use before now,
Shannon said, settling down.
How long will it hold?
Dave asked.
Until Theo takes it down. Sit and eat. We have at least 4 days of this. Get used to it.
Oirion was about to object, but a look from Raven made him go silent. It was, after all, their only hope. This would make the difference between who lived and who died in these woods. They all had a chance now, and Oirion had to admit that Shannon was very good at edging things in. Step by step, Shannon was making everything, from sorcery to love, acceptable. He looked at the man, wondering if he was purposely tearing the priests apart, or if it was just survival to him. Shannon looked from a critical study of Theo's work over to Oirion. He always seemed to know when he was being watched. He waited for Oirion to say something, but when he didn't, Shannon went back to studying the strength of the spell.
How did I do?
Theo asked, taking a seat near Shannon. Shannon was unable to be his usual distance from the others, but kept back as best he could in the small area.
Very well,
he said.
So we can sleep?
Even asked, concerned about the zombies that kept walking into the shield.
Yes,
Shannon said.
So Theo is a sorcerer?
He asked with a nervous sideways look at Theo.
Are you not glad that he is a good and gracious man?
Shannon asked. Ivan swallowed hard.
I always thought that sorcerers were old,
Ivan said.
Theo's what, 16?
16?
Theo objected. He swore under his breath in Awans.
No?
Tavia asked.
I would have guessed 18.
Tavia.
He objected, hurt.
Well, how old are you?
Oirion asked.
He's 64.
Shannon said.
With a birthday soon.
How do you know that?
Oirion asked.
I know who he is,
Shannon said.
You do?
Ravan asked, surprised. Shannon had a hint of a smile playing in his eyes.
64? Really?
Tavia asked.
How the hell does that work? You barely have a beard, and Cindy couldn't have been more than 18.
I didn't marry her for her age or her intelligence,
he said.
She had other assets I was after.
Wide hips and health.
Raven nodded to himself.
She would have had large, healthy babies.
That helped, but no.
Theo admitted.
What then?
The dwarf asked, oblivious to any other redeeming qualities.
She had a large dowry and a political boost.
So you can't be too mad,
Ivan said.
If I was too mad, Ivan, I would have killed you by now,
he said seriously. For the first time, no one doubted that if he wanted to kill someone, he could.
But Theo...
Drop it,
Dave said.
Let's just try to get some rest and get the hell out of this forest as fast as we can.
Thank you for listening, but please keep in mind clicking on those like and subscribe buttons makes it possible for us to continue sharing content with you.